awesome. So I guess the first thing that we want to talk about is what's going on over the weekend and then into Tuesday. All right, I'm not giving you any like quote unquote homework to turn in over the weekend because I'm nice and everybody likes me, and I don't want to ruin that because in reality, I mean that's it's really, I don't know if I told this class or not. Did I tell this class or did I tell another class? Like one of the reasons that I got into becoming a professor is to make friends with 18 to 22-year-olds. I don't have a lot of friends and I need friends. No? Good. All right. Yeah, there you go. Some of you guys are getting my jokes. Yeah, I'm not, I just know that, you're going to be doing some family stuff this weekend and it's Labor Day and we just want to chill. It's kind of like the last weekend of summer. So we won't have anything written, anything reading, any of that stuff to do over the weekend. All right. So just enjoy yourselves. Enjoy the weekend. The only thing to really do is just kind of prep yourself for, if you want to read ahead for next week. All right. We're going to get into Greece. All right. Since we're finishing up, we're going to finish up Egypt. We're going to figure out what happens to the Egyptians, and then we're going to move into Greece. So if you want to, you can read up a little bit, start reading ahead on Greece, perfectly fine. But you can also just basically run through learning module number 1, make sure you're prepped for the quiz to take next week. Okay, so that's where let's start today. I asked you to, kind of bring some questions. If you do have any questions on, kind of what's going to be on the quiz and that type of thing. So does anybody have any questions off the top of their heads as far as the quiz is? I'll just start to kind of rattle some things off here on my own to help you out. It's going to be 50 points. It doesn't mean there's going to be 50 questions, but it's going to be worth 50 points. You're going to have from Tuesday to do it. All right, so you're going to have a whole week to do it. Those dates, what is next Tuesday? Next Tuesday is the 8th, okay? So you'll have that whole week between the 8th and the 15th to do the quiz. Just make sure it's in by, the final due date for it is going to be class time on Tuesday, September 15th. Is that cool? All right, so you guys make sure you have an understanding of that. Anything else off the top of your heads that you can think of as far as like format? So what type of questions? There's going to be, there'll be some what I like to be called, I call multiple choice questions, but basically they're, I like to call them multiple answer questions. Okay. What I mean by multiple answer questions is, and here's fair warning. Okay. And like I said, I'm a nice professor, so I give you a fair warning on these. When I have questions like, what, can you pick out everything that had an effect on the Mesopotamian environment? Okay, maybe that's a question. Can you choose everything from the list below that had an effect on the Mesopotamian environment? And you'll see Tigris up there. You'll see Euphrates up there. You might see something else up there. You got to choose all of them. Does that make sense? All right, so it's not just going to be one answer. You're going to have to, I'm going to say choose everything here from the list that you think had an effect on the Mesopotamian environment. That'll be a very typical question that I would ask. For like something like Egypt, I'll have something like, who were major players of the Egyptian mythological scene, like who were major Egyptian gods? You know, can you choose from the list below who were some of the major Egyptian gods? And, you know, like maybe 2 out of the 5 choices will be Egyptian gods. Does that make sense? Okay. So you'll have to kind of discern. And basically, guys, none of my multiple answer questions, none of the questions that come up as multiple choice questions, none of them only have one answer. They'll all have at least 2, sometimes more answers that you're going to choose out of the list. Okay, fair warning for people who are in here and are watching this. When you encounter those questions, there's never just one answer. Okay? And I'm not going to trick you and put all of them. Like there's not going to be like all 5 are going to be answers, because that's just stupid and mean. Okay, so it'll make you choose at least more than one on those. Will there be dates? So no, I'm not going to have like specific dates. I'm not going to be like, when was Hammurabi's code written? You know, give me the date and give it now. No, but you are going to have to like know like things like what came first, Neolithic or Paleolithic. Okay, you're going to have to know things like that. All right, you're going to have, you know, you're going to have to know that the Paleolithic era came before the Neolithic. Like Paleolithic means Old Stone Age, and Neolithic means New Stone Age. Okay, so you're going to have to know those. I'm more of a chronological professor. Okay, I'm not asking specific dates, but you got to know what happened and when, which order that stuff happened. Fair enough? Good. Elizabeth says, so yeah, I mean, all those questions that I will have up there, yeah, like the multiple choice questions, all of them will have at least more than one answer. All right, so about, yeah, to close that loop up. So what else? I like to ask questions that have open-ended type things where you can choose your adventure on how you want to take it. For instance, I ask a lot of questions like, you know, what do you believe, or what can you choose is, you know, most important about a certain thing. Okay, and I'm going to type that in there to the chat. So, for instance, I'll ask a question, guaranteed question on the first quiz. What do you think is the most important thing to have, the most important characteristic that a civilization must have? We've talked about that over the last couple classes. Okay, that's a guaranteed question. You guys can choose any of the things that we've talked about. You can choose writing, you can choose law, you can choose religion, you can choose major forms of architecture. You can choose whatever you want. Okay, so it's got to be within like the parameters of what we've gone over in class. But you got like 6 or 7 different choices that you can make, and so you choose the one that you think you can prove the clearest with the best amount of detail from your notes. Does that make sense? Okay, so you just choose the one that you think you can prove the clearest, where you're like, oh, okay, I got the most detail in my notes. I feel the most comfy talking about law, because then I can talk about Hammurabi. Or I feel that the most important thing is writing, because I can talk about cuneiform and hieroglyphics. Cool? Okay, so you can like kind of choose whatever you want on those. Those are very common questions that I ask. All right, so you'll have kind of multiple answer questions, and then you'll have a few what do you think is most important thing questions. It's not going to be difficult. It will be timed, but you're going to have plenty of time to complete the quiz as long as you're prepped and ready to go. Okay. So, should it take you, like 15 minutes to take it? No, it should take you longer than that. If it only takes you 15 to 20 minutes, I would suggest going back through the quiz and rereading your answers and maybe adding some detail if you're done in 20 minutes or something like that. But it should take you like a normal kind of quiz in a class would take, kind of, because you're going to have time to look up your answers and things like that. So it should take you between probably, 30, 40 minutes or so to take the quiz if you're really filling it out with the amount of detail that is necessary to be successful. I think that's everything off the top of my head. Do you guys got any other questions on what you may think is on the quiz? It's everything from learning module number 1. All right, so it's, prehistoric era stuff, Paleolithic, Neolithic, it's Mesopotamia, and it's Egypt. All right, that's what's going to be on it. And then we're starting new stuff next week with Greece. Cool. All right, good. If any other questions like pop up, while we're having a little discussion here about some other stuff, just throw them into the chat, and I'll answer them right off the top. Great, good. So for our tiny group that we had today, we got 15 people in here. It's good. So I thank you for coming to class. I thank you for coming to class, I guess. Good for you. All right. Bonus points. So what are some things that we talked about with that CPA that we were doing for today? Some of the things off the top of your head that we were talking about. All right. One, okay, with the Egyptians, okay, what do you guys think about Egypt? Like, what are some things that you maybe found interesting about the Egyptians, maybe that you could pick out, choose? Was the video, did you like the video? I like those engineering and empire videos. I think those are cool videos. We're going to do a few of those. There's a few, there's one with the Greeks, there's one with the Romans. I find those more interesting than just your average history video. But so as far as like the Egyptians, like anything that kind of strikes you as striking about their culture, civilization wise, religiously, writing, those types of things. Hieroglyphics. Anybody? What was cool about hieroglyphics, I think, did you guys see how that it wasn't like they were actually trying to make sounds with the pictures? I found that to be really interesting. All right. I always find that to be endlessly fascinating when you look at those pictures and it's not really a picture, it's actually a sound that they were trying to make and sound out. Find those to be interesting. I mean, throw something into the chat if anybody's got anything. Constantly innovating is going. Constantly innovating. Absolutely. Especially when it comes to the pyramids. When it comes to the pyramids, constantly innovating, I think, is definitely something to contemplate. I think with Egyptian culture, you get, especially with the pyramids. Did you guys not see? It's a very human process that it's called trial and error. They hit a lot of trial and error. They had a lot of, let's see if this works. Oh no, it fell down. Okay. There's a lot of trial and error going on with the building process. Hopefully you saw that with the pyramids. What else? as far as the Egyptians go. Lucas says they spent a lot of their lives preparing for the afterlife. Love it. Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point to make. You know, um, and I'll type that in here in big letters. Afterlife was a gigantic part of Egyptian life. Hopefully you guys can have an appreciation of that. That thing called the Book of the Dead was a really big part of Egyptian life. Like they were focused on prepping themselves for the next life. And to me, that's a modern connection. To me, that's a very modern connection. We spend a heck of a lot of time, people in the modern world, especially if you're, Christian, if you practice Judaism, if you practice Islam, you spend a heck of a lot of time as a practicing Christian, Jew, or Muslim thinking about that next life. I know as a kid that was raised, Roman Catholic schools my whole life and Thomas More's at Catholic school. I mean, you have a lot of time spent with thinking about the next world. And I think the Egyptians thought about that a lot. Now, they weren't obsessed with, the afterlife or death, but they definitely wanted to be prepared for what came next. I think that's a really cool connection that we can make with an Egyptian. Like if we were to kind of go back in time and sit down with an Egyptian and we were somehow able to converse with them, I think that we would find that in common with that person, that maybe we would both believe that there is an afterlife and that the afterlife is a pretty decent place. We would have that in common with them in the modern world. I always try and figure out what would be that's another thing that helps you with history is like if you could imagine maybe somehow if you could sit down with just your average Egyptian or sit down with your average Mesopotamian or your average Greek, like you do when you meet new people, like you would try to figure out what you got in common so you could talk about stuff. I always try to think about what the heck would we have in common if I sat and talked with you. And that kind of helps you understand history. Good stuff. Like as far as the Egyptians, what was the second part we talked about on that CPA with Egyptian civilization? All right. Anybody have anything that they would throw in there is like, if somebody came up to you on the street and said, what the Egyptians do? Like, give me the one thing that they contributed to civilization. What'd you guys throw in there? I read some of them this morning before class. Some of you guys had some really cool thoughts. If you care to throw them into the let's see here. Good stuff. Wanting to, okay. Architecture, I think, Garrett, it's a good one. Wanting to improve life. So Dalton says wanting to improve life. I'm intrigued by that, but it's not specific enough. Okay. And I'm not picking on you, but I want to just talk about that because that's going to be something that you guys are going to be dealing with on the quiz next week. Is it try to be as specific as possible with your answers. Okay, art and architecture. All right, good. So let me take some of these answers you guys are putting in, and let me show you how I'm going to kind of assess them if these were quiz answers. All right. So I say, what is one of the things that the Egyptians contribute? You guys say architecture. That's like you're halfway there. It's a good answer, but I need something more specific. Architecture, yes, you're there, but that's like 3 out of 5 points. What would get you 5 out of 5 points? Yes, architecture, but you would need something else to throw in there. I mean, everybody knows the word, right? Obviously, you would type in pyramids. Good, okay? The word then, you would be like, well, the Egyptians had monumental architecture. The architecture that the Egyptians left for posterity is pyramids. And here's an example of one. That is 5 out of 5, 6 out of 6. That's the A answer. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, that's how the quiz answers are going to work. Okay. If you just put architecture and then you say, well, Eagan knows what I'm talking about. He knows that the Egyptians built pyramids. I do, but remember we talked about this in one of our very first classes. You got to make sure that you have to kind of assume when you do these quizzes that the person you're writing it for doesn't have a clue about the subject. Don't assume that I know what you're talking about. Okay? So just remember that on your quizzes. Architecture, good one. Yes. Pyramids, excellent. What about religion? Anybody find anything interesting about Egyptian mythology? Anything interesting about Egyptian mythology? Things that maybe modern connections that you could make? Any modern connections to Egyptian religion? Like, would there be anything that a modern, yeah, I think Trinity, man, that's a really good point. The separation of state and religion. Now, they didn't have like a specific separation of church and state like we have in the modern sense, but they certainly had aspects of their government that were focused on other things, such as, they had, what we today would have like ministers or heads of certain things. They would have, kind of a minister of the interior who was worried about pyramids and making sure the Nile River had proper, outlets and things like that. They certainly would do that. Yeah, I think certainly. You mentioned that even in today, politics struggles with government and religious beliefs. Sure. Totally agree. The difference, though, is that we don't see our heads of state, we don't see our political leaders as religious leaders. All right. We don't see the thing that makes the Egyptians different, okay? And they had this individual named Pharaoh, who, for lack of a better term, he was their king. But he was also what? He wasn't just a king. He wasn't just the head of the government. And you guys can type it in there or say it, unmute yourself. He was all excellent. He was also a god. Very good. So that's the difference with the Egyptians, is they believed that their leader was a god. Okay. And that takes you to the next level, as far as social, confidence. The Egyptians are one of the most confident cultures that we come across. They're very, very, they have great by and large, they have really good self-esteem. They have good cultural self-esteem. Why wouldn't you, dude? I mean, you're building pyramids. You have, God is your king, right? That promotes some good cultural self-esteem. Okay. And so those are things that kind of separate us from the Egyptians, right? We luckily don't find our political leaders to be godly or religious leaders. Okay. And I don't think we would like, imagine if like the governor of the state or the president of the United States was like also like a bishop or was also like the Pope. That would be too close for us. We wouldn't like that. We'd be like, no, 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 no. You worry about state, you worry about religion. All right. The Egyptians, it was all kind of smushed into one position. The guy was the head of the government and he was the head of the religion because he was God. All right. Cool modern question. Trinity asks, would you say North Korea has that style of government? Kinda. They certainly have a oppressive dictatorship, and Egypt was absolutely, it was every bit of a dictatorship with a god king installed. I don't know necessarily that the North Koreans, I'm not sure that the Kim Jong-un family and all of them, I'm not sure that they don't view Kim Jong-un as a god, but he's certainly an elevated human, certainly above them. One of the great stories about North Korea and how people view their current dictatorial leader, Kim Jong-un, was there was a story a couple years ago about how he took up golf. And if you ever play golf, you know how difficult golf is when you start. And the story that came out of the North Korean press, which is obviously controlled by the government, is that Kim Jong-un took up golf, and in his first round, he had six holes in one. He shot 6 hole-in-ones in his first round. And everybody was like, oh, yeah, well, it makes sense. I mean, if anybody could do it, he could do it. And for hours, I see some of your faces. You're like, oh, come on. Like, really? Yeah, really. If that's the only thing that you're exposed to, and that's the only type of, remember, that type of system has a lockdown on information. Like, they can't just hop on Google or read anything they want. It's all locked down and all sort of kept closely wrapped. That, friends, is an interesting modern connection that you can make to the Egyptians. Did not the Egyptians also have, and I'm going to type this word in here, did not the Egyptians also have kind of a lockdown on information and who could learn and who could write? I think yes. I think 100% yes. I think that's a definite connection that you can make between, say, people who live underneath a dictatorship like North Korea and people who lived in ancient Egypt. Is there was only a certain amount of people who, quote unquote, knew lots of stuff. And they were the elites and they were the upper crust in society. And so the information that trickles out into the population, into the normal milieu, the Joey bag of donuts of the population, that stuff is going to be filtered. It's going to be very, very, very censored by the upper social elites. We're not going to let all the information out, if you know what I mean. Okay. So that's a great modern connection to make, is that certainly I think you could argue that to get a population to believe that their leader is a god, you can't have any other information out there from any other cultures that talk about their leaders. Does that make sense? All right. Egypt is one of the most, and I'm going to type this word in here, it's one of the most isolated cultures that we're going to look at. They're extremely isolated. the Egyptians were isolated geographically. Okay, on either side of Egypt, if you remember the map, on either side is you got like the Sinai Peninsula, which is a desert. On the other side of Egypt, you have desert, the Sahara Desert. And so you got to, they're very isolated. At the top of their culture, that Nile Delta is, you're not going to get a lot of interaction, people coming down from the Mediterranean into your culture, because that Nile Delta in the ancient world was very, very, very swampy and jungly, and it was impossible to get through. So the Egyptians are very much like a little beehive culture. They're very isolated, not going to interact with a lot of other people. So if you're not interacting with other cultures who believe different things, hopefully you guys can start to see how that makes sense, that you would believe all kinds of stuff if you're not interacting with anybody else. It's kind of like the Santa Claus principle. You know what I mean? Where the belief in Santa Claus, you know, it usually tends to break down once kids get into school with other kids, because they start hearing things. You know what I mean? You got older brothers and sisters from people that you're going to school with are telling their younger brothers and sisters, hey, it's not real, you know, and then they tell you and it like shatters your world. And you're like, what the hell? Like, really? You know, it was, I remember like, well, here's a funny story about Santa Claus and me and my family. I remember my mom came to me one day after school when I was in grade school. You know, I was like asking questions about Santa Claus. And she came up to me, she goes, Pat, she goes, your father and I are Santa Claus. And I was like, well, that's kind of awesome. And so I thought for an entire year that my parents were Santa Claus and Mrs. Claus, and that my parents delivered the prizes to all the other kids of the world. Until I started to realize, wait a minute, that would be impossible. But that was a fun year. Like, when I thought when she said, you know, Pat, your father and I are Santa Claus, I was like, that's awesome. And then I would go around to my buddies. I'd be like, dude, my mom and dad are Santa Claus. And they'd be like, yeah, duh. And I'd be like, oh, you know, too, dude, my mom and dad are Santa Claus. So, well, all right. That's one of those beliefs that if you are isolated within your family before you go to school, and it's just mom and dad and brother and sister, you believe anything. And then you start interacting with other kids and getting other information and stuff, and then your world opens up. That's a small kind of micro example of how the Egyptians were. All right. One of the things, and we'll talk about this next week when we get into Greece and everything, one of the things that doesn't destroy Egyptian culture, but it kind of wrecks their religious belief system, is when they start interacting with other cultures like the Greeks and the Hebrews and the Mesopotamians, and they start saying, like Santa Claus, like, hey, our leader is God. And the other cultures are like, no, he's not. He's just a dude. He's a king. We have a king too. He's right there. And the Egyptians are like, no. Our king is God. And it's very much like a bigger example of interacting with people. All right. And that's what kind of hurts. That's really hurts Egyptian religious belief systems, is when they start mingling with other cultures in the Mediterranean. Good stuff. Yeah, man. So like those are some of the cool things that we learn with the Egyptians. You know, that's a really cool discussion that we had. I'm glad we went down that road. Trinity, I thank you for that. That was great. Yeah, guys, I mean, unless you got any other questions, I haven't seen anything pop into the chat, like as far as like quiz questions and stuff like that. Let me know. Here's one of the last things we'll talk about with the quiz. All right. Once you click to begin the quiz, like you're in, that's it. Like that's your attempt. You can't like pause it. You can't get out of it. You know what I mean? Okay, so that's why I want you guys to be prepped and ready to roll when you click begin on the quiz, because that's it. That's the attempt. What happens if you hit the wrong button? Or what happens if you're taking the quiz and the internet poops out and it kicks you out? No worries, don't panic. Okay, just send me a quick little message on Canvas or email and be like, hey, Eagan, this is what happened. My internet blew up. Something happened and it kicked me out. And I'll go in and I'll just hit some buttons and open it back up for you. Does that make sense? Okay, so don't worry. If something weird happens, your computer runs out of batteries or power goes out, it's okay. Don't worry. We'll get it fixed. But the thing is, once you click begin, like that's your quiz. Okay, and it starts the time then. I think that's it as far as getting prepped for those things. If you do got any other questions, going into next week, let me know. And again, if you want to read ahead, you can start trickling your way through chapter 4 in the Greeks, because that's where we're heading next week. Other than that, friends, that's good. We've been here for 35, 40 minutes talking about some things. That's all we got for today. We had a good discussion. Egyptians are taken care of this week. And let's have a great weekend. All right. Have fun out there. Be safe. But also have fun. I mean, you're in college, so have some fun. All right. So you'll get an invite over the weekend for our class on Tuesday. So go ahead and click on that next Tuesday, and I'll see you back in here after our fun weekend Tuesday at 11 o'clock. Cool? Awesome. All right, guys. Cheers. Have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for a great discussion.